Before we begin, we have a favor to ask. If you like this podcast, please help us spread the word about the show. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. Another way is to tell a fellow art teacher. Either way, it helps others find the show. The Blocks, Paper, Scissors podcast has a lot of information regarding teaching art, not just for TAB teachers, but for anyone who is looking to further their understanding of children in a choice-based classroom. This show is about finding new ways to engage children and help them find their voice through visual arts.
Welcome to episode 15 of the Blocks, Paper, Scissors podcast. My name is Clark Freilich.
And I'm Clyde Gaw.
In today's episode, Clyde and I will be catching up on what's happened since August. And there's been a lot.
Yeah.
What's going on? What have you been up to?
Well, let's see.
Should we start with cardboard engineering?
You know, I was just thinking of like school activities, but now that you mention it, we've got a pretty cool offer from the Indiana State Museum, and that's going to be a year-long gig for us, and we will be at the Indiana State Museum from the rest of the fall semester, 2018-2019 school year, until the end of the winter and fall semester, 2018-2019 school year. So from now, which is November, until probably May, we will be in downtown Indianapolis on various weekends, working on cardboard construction projects at the third floor in the inside the Indiana State Museum, and
yeah, we have to come up with some hard dates on those.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. We told
Bethany.
we told Administrator Bethany that we would give her some dates, and we haven't done that yet. But we're pretty certain we're going to be there on the weekends for sure in April, May, perhaps March.
Yeah.
Perhaps a couple weekends in February and January.
Yeah. We'll have to see.
We'll post when we're going to be there.
So then probably the next thing that we did was present at the Art Education Association of Indiana's conference.
That was a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time in University of St. Francis.
Mm-hmm.
Or at the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne.
Beautiful campus. Congratulations to all of our AEAI colleagues on their successful implementation of that conference.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was well attended. Pretty exciting conference. Was glad to be a part of it, and I was really fascinated that there was other presenters there presenting on teaching for artistic behavior and having groups of teachers because that conference is, for general art education practice. I thought the TAB presentations that we attended, Brett Bailey was there.
Ashley Toy
did a presentation there.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen Odell.
Yeah.
Was doing a presentation also.
Mm-hmm.
So we were thrilled to see our colleagues sharing their insight into TAB and art education practice.
Yeah, it was. I know our presentation was called Creativity Unleashed, Setting the Conditions for Creativity. And it's something that you and I have kind of been working on back and forth.
Yeah.
We started it at our technology conference here, and we've been doing some talking and thinking about creativity and what those conditions are for creativity. It was pretty well attended. We had a lot of higher ed people.
I know we spoke to Dr. Michael Prater
From Ball State.
From Ball State was there. Some other art teachers, and had a good room of folks. So the conditions for creativity, and I know we listed 7 of them at the time, I believe, but I think there are more that you could probably drum up. But I think 7 important conditions.
And they go back and forth. I mean, sometimes you'll think of one and it'll fold into another. Those that we listed were, I know one of them was autonomy.
Yes. You can't really become an agent of your own ideas if you don't have autonomy. Thinking about what it means to be an independent operator and to be able to convey your own ideas, you have to have autonomy. And so providing a large space is important, providing space. Then again, knowing your kids, knowing their capabilities, because K-12 setting is kind of and I've said this, and forgive my use of this term, but schools are kind of a strange place. And I say strange in that children outside of schools have all the rights as most other citizens in the United States. But once they go into a K-12 institution, their rights are diminished. And so
it's all about conforming to norms.
Yeah.
And
the school regs, the code of conduct. Schools are not very democratic places. In fact, they're authoritarian from my perspective. So that's why conditions for creativity in a classroom, and we're speaking about a tab classroom, you have to include autonomy, because you never know what the child's ideas, what kind of pathway or what kind of space or materials they might require. So they're going to go on a learning pathway that in which you have to allow that the unwinding irregular pathway to present itself. You have to allow that to happen. In a tab classroom, you're providing that pathway for multiple students.
Right, you're empowering them in their own learning. And that empowerment is paramount, I guess, to a child feeling as a part of his education as anything. And he's not just a passive receiver of knowledge, but he's an active participant.
They're actively seeking knowledge, seeking out a creating experience, using the materials and the space inside the art room, the tab classroom. Here's an interesting moment that took place last week. I watch my children's behaviors. I watch their actions, and I know who needs interventions and who is self-directed. And we have different types of children come into the room. Some who need very little support, and others who need all kinds of support to engage in art activity or to engage in creative activity. And we had talked about this earlier on the podcast. Thinking about Ian Sand's 30% rule. He said there's 30% of kids are able to pursue their own ideas. Another 30% need a little bit of direction, a little bit of assistance, and the other 30% need intensive interventions. And so I was frustrated with one of my children in the last 30% group, and I said, what does it take to get you to participate in in an art activity, will you only do art? Because he didn't want to do art. He didn't want to make art. I said, do you only do activities for points? And he said, yes, Mr. God, that's how we've been trained to learn. We've been trained to learn for points.
I will give you 100 points if you start working.
And what was fascinating and sad was that like a dozen of his classmates lifted their heads up while I'm having this conversation with them, and they all agreed, yes, this is the way it is in school.
Yeah.
This is we only work for points.
That's not how we do things in life.
So
well, unless you're a teacher, because then you just get points. You don't get money, you just get points. He's such a good teacher.
Well, I'm very concerned that, this business of, working for points or working for rewards.
We all know that's not good, but
that's what schools, they are all about radical behaviorism, conditioning to do tasks based on rewards, which are grades and points. You and I are quite aware of these invisible structures in the school. They are management structures, learning structures. That's a concern of mine, is that we're raising multiple generations of citizens who will function for rewards or punishments. This business about creativity, which requires higher level thinking and deep insight into how the individual operates, and critical thinking with respect to formulating solutions to problems. We're not doing enough of that in school, and
that's why autonomy is so important. So kids can learn. They have to know what they don't know, and they have to put themselves in that position of desiring to learn and not just being spoon-fed
right
all the time. And in elementary, usually with the younger kids, it's not a problem, but by the time they get to 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, you see that conditioning taking over.
Yes.
And, in a tab classroom, we're trying to not do that, but they're still coming into our classroom, and sometimes they will just freeze up because it's confusing for them, and it's hard for them to make that adjustment, especially if you are the only class that offers this opportunity for a student or for children to be their own agent in learning. So trying to set up using autonomy and choice, I think, is very important. And it's one of the cornerstones or pillars of teaching for artistic behavior, is the student is the artist. And what do artists do? So they're making those critical decisions.
And you think about the formation of the mind and the relationship of learning activities and the formation of mind. Elliot Eisner had a great statement about curriculum. He said that curriculum is a mind-altering instrument. And he's right.
Mm-hmm.
The curriculum, when I think about curriculum, the curriculum can be democratic. It could be where the child and the teacher are sharing power in and negotiating how the learning activities and how the learning experience is going to go forward. And in so doing, the child's strengths can be tapped into. And from a neurological standpoint, the child is gaining emotional say.
When teachers think of curriculum, they're thinking, it's my understanding that they're wanting a step-by-step, this is what we teach.
Yes.
And a how-to. Tab isn't a how-to. You have to be immersed in the environment and be a participant in the environment where you're not just plugging in modules and the kids are going to learn. In a tab classroom, teachers are led by the students. And a very observant teacher would recognize when students are ready for this, or when students are ready for that, or maybe they need this. I had a student who, he's a 4th grade student, and he's kind of squirrely when you look at it from the outside. And the other day, I had kids draw on my whiteboard. For some reason. It was just board. I have a big 24-foot whiteboard in my classroom, and he's over there drawing on the board because he is not a drawer, but he was drawing some very interesting things, and I had to, I didn't want to bother him. I didn't want to walk up to him and say, "What's going on?" Because it was such a shock. He found something that he could pull himself into, whether it was the largeness. So maybe it's something he likes to work very large, and so that's maybe something I have to explore with him.
Perhaps he felt safe enough, and from a developmental standpoint, he felt secure enough to join in with the others and draw on the whiteboard. And
well, it kind of brings in one of our other things with collaboration. It could have been, this is just something I'm thinking about, he was up there with a bunch of other children working on this giant piece of artwork. Maybe he was enjoying the collaborative part of it. Maybe it was the showy part of it, standing up in front of the classroom with a marker and, everyone's looking at him. But it's just one of those unique things that happen in a tab classroom that you normally wouldn't see in a regular classroom, because kids don't have that opportunity to just walk up somewhere and start working when they find the opportunity. Students naturally want to work together. And
social learning is powerful. Lev Vygotsky, the Russian cognitive scientist, did lots of research, and Vygotsky's name is synonymous with social learning activities and emergent social activity. We see that in the tab classroom all the time. Creativity, creative activity, swarm creativity, involving multiple children, multiple artists. I've got some mural artists working in the art room right now, and very natural how this activity, we have, instead of a whiteboard like you have set up, we've got some big paper just taped and pinned to the wall, and I have a sign that says mural center. And so I made a few marks. I made a couple of stencil marks on it. Stenciling is a form of printmaking we do a lot of in the room, and I was over there messing around, and I showed one of the kids how to stencil on the mural, and pretty soon there were 4 kids working on the mural, and now they've been devoting most of their class time, the past 6 class times, they've been working on it all together, and the camaraderie, the unity that they experience working together on this mural, and it's kind of like an abstract, kind of like a map, almost like your kid's battle map. Only this one is it's got like a Christmas theme to it.
They also feel safe doing that when they're with somebody else. It kind of softens the expectations from them, maybe. I know in elementary, when we talk about artwork and artwork for the art show, kids are always asking, can we do it with somebody else? Maybe that's how that's their invitation to create. And I know you and I have talked about some of the most creative times that people have is usually in art school. Because you're surrounded by other creative people, very highly creative people in that environment. It's just a very creative environment, and it pushes people into other areas. It lightens them in other areas. It takes a lot of the pressure off.
The TAB classroom does a lot to take pressure off of kids. I surveyed my kids a couple months ago. I asked them, I said, what changes would you like to see in the room? Do you want me to give you more demos with longer instruction?
Like, no, Mr. Gosh.
No, they said.
Just shut up and leave us alone.
That's exactly what they said. No, it's perfect. We like the little 5-minute talks. We like our time. What was really remarkable was they were talking about stress. They're talking about stress that they experience from the regular school day,
Mm-hmm.
and how important their art time was to them, and the fact that I respected them if they chose not to work on art for that particular class time, which everything in our room is very consensual. In fact, I have, the room is geared up for art making, but I make it clear to the kids that your only requirement in my room is to turn in your portfolio monthly and to show me your progress on whatever art projects you're working on. And I have found that is the most satisfactory arrangement that I can come up with to meet the demands of the state and the needs of the children. And schools will say we want our school to be relevant to the needs of children. Well, I mean, if you say you're gonna provide opportunity for relevance, then you have to give them autonomy so that the children are equal partners in the learning that goes down. Otherwise, children feel the beat down. They feel the
grind.
The grind, yes.
It's just constant, almost harassment. Grades, assignments, got to turn it in on time. It's the most silly thing I ever heard of, getting grades for practice. But I digress.
No, you don't digress. Those are the conditions we live in, and we know where, we could just, the elephant in the room is, of course, the fact that the school has to meet the data requirements of the state. That's what powers curriculum.
We're dealing with the whole child.
Right.
Socially and emotionally.
The mind is more than just the cognitive side of the mind. The mind, you have to include the emotional realm of the individual. They're interconnected.
But schools don't do that. They're either running to you or running away from you.
Yes.
We try not to let that data piece get in the way. And
Right.
So many teachers, art teachers, are hell-bent on getting a grade. I honestly can't figure out how in the world are you going to grade a 7-year-old's artwork.
Johnny, your
Or
drawing
even-
is worth a C.
Or I remember being in art class when I was in 6th grade and getting letter grades and thinking, why is this one any better than the other one? Or when I was in 9th grade and my teacher didn't like my drawing because it was dark. So he thought I was on drugs.
Was it a Halloween themed drawing?
No,
or?
it was just kind of dark. It was, I don't know.
Maybe
It was.
You were into dark
It
atmospheres,
had,
perhaps.
well, I think most high school kids are trying to find themselves and experimenting with a lot of different ideas. And I was just thinking of something that was on the darker side, and he didn't appreciate it. He actually confronted me. He looked at me and said, "I know you're on drugs." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I was a swimmer, and my eyes were always red from the chlorine.
And because of your drawing, you thought that you were on drugs.
Oh, yeah. So based on that drawing, I thought it was a good drawing. I think I still have it somewhere. I got a C on it, which is a totally random grade. And it wasn't a pretty picture, but I didn't let it bother me. But Maybe I should go see a shrink.
No, but you remember the incident because
Well, I remember the emotional impact
because
of being told I was on drugs when an authoritarian figure looks at you and tells you you're on drugs.
you were an athlete who was at swimming practice.
So anyways, that was my experience, and I don't know if that had anything to do with my later experience of trying to figure everything out art-wise and letting people explore where they want to explore. Teaching art is not a step-by-step process. Just like you and I were talking about the creative process. You start one place and you end up another place, but you can go many different directions in between those 2 points.
Thinking about different art techniques with materials. I mean, you mentioned step-by-step process. Like, what's the step-by-step process to making a clay vessel? There's a step-by-step process for that. But what is the process to get a child to fall in love with art for the rest of their life? Is it to embed them in the step-by-step process of making clay vessels, in which you tell them that their other art ideas in real time don't matter? If you don't honor the child's ideas in a time-sensitive matter, you lose the opportunity to get the child to fall in love with art. And that has been my main teaching goal throughout most of my career, especially since I've been working with TAB curriculum practice, is to get children to fall in love with art and art making. In order to do that, we have to respect their capacity for generating ideas, recognizing that ideas are time sensitive, and providing them with autonomy to explore and experiment with the realization of those ideas. So thinking about Kathy Douglas's learning goals for her students, I think I've memorized them, but let me see. The children can have an idea. They can come to class with an idea. Children can gather up the materials to begin to realize the idea. That's the second part, gathering up the materials. The third step is exploring and expressing the ideas with the art materials.
Including mistakes.
The child can then determine when they are done. That part of the process of Kathy's process, the child can determine when they're done, and the teacher can also have a little bit of input too and make suggestions. And that's what I do. You might feel like you're done, but what if you did this or that to your work? Do you think maybe that might enhance the work?
As long as kids have a choice in making that decision, because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll say, well, what would happen if you did, what do you think might happen if you tried this or if you did this?
Yeah.
And they'll either be open to it or they're done with it.
Yes.
And then sometimes I'll even say, why don't you just put it away for a day or two?
Yeah.
And then come back. Because a lot of times they'll come up and they're asked, is this done? And they haven't learned how to know when something is done. So They're always looking to the teacher to say, is this done? And then the teacher makes a judgment based on neatness usually or something like that.
Adult ideas related to
Right.
art, which we have to avoid. You have to learn to avoid as a teacher, to let go of your adult values, adult judgments on children's art. The other learning goals stated by Kathy are, the child, after they determine when their art is finished, including the negotiations with the teacher, then the child can put their materials away. They can learn to take care of their workspace, and the child can reflect on what just happened and what's next. So I look at that. I look at Kathy's learning goals, and I think they're just brilliant. It's like a feedback loop, and if you get children to love that process, it continues. It's a process that they will remember because it's emotionally connected, and we know that anytime learning is connected to emotions, it will stay with you for a long time.
Yeah, if you're interested in those, there's a file on the Tab Educators file section.
I like to steal from you and steal from other people. Like I steal from Kathy and Diane and
I think that's one nice thing about
else.
Tab teachers is they're very open to sharing
Yes,
what works in their classroom, and it's always open to modification as long as we're properly noting where the original idea came from.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tab teachers are very generous.
Just like any teacher, we get stuck. We have our own blind spots, and sometimes someone will do something that we might not even thought about.
So thinking about, the topic of creativity is a very complex topic, and, we set some conditions for it. We're just getting into it.
Yeah, so we talked about autonomy and collaboration.
Yes.
Today. And I think we
just touched on collaboration.
Yeah.
We mentioned Lev Vygotsky. I think we need to get deeper into
check out his Facebook page. So we have a lot to talk about and continue to talk about. We're going to talk about playfulness. We'll talk about the environment. We'll talk about...
Did I tell you about the Chinese scholars who came to visit me?
No. Talk about time.
I had 3 Chinese scholars stay at my house.
Risk-taking.
Last year. And I asked them, I said, here in the United States, teachers get a lot of negative feedback about their schools. We don't think schools are very good in America. But here you gentlemen have traveled thousands of miles to come visit American schools. Why are you interested in visiting American schools? And the answer by the 3 gentlemen, and two of them were members of the Chinese Communist Party, and they were principals in like high schools. The other teacher was a physics teacher, and so I asked them, why do you want to come look at American schools? And their answer was creativity. They want to see how Americans do creativity in schools. So my concern is that American schools are getting less creative. There's a trade-off there.
We're more backwards. We instead of recognizing what we do really, really well, we're looking elsewhere, thinking that we can find the answer in a test score. Just look at what they do in Finland.
If you ask the Finnish where their ideas for education came from, you know what they'll tell you? They got them from the United States.
In the 70s.
In the 70s, and from the progressive education movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you like them apples?
Makes me want to live in Finland. So we're going to end this episode right here. We will be back very soon and continue this conversation.
We just have couple art shows to do, and finals coming up, semester finals.
You do, I don't. Grades. And then Christmas. Yeah. So I think we'll probably have at least one more episode between now and Christmas. I think we'll squeeze 1 or 2 in there.
Yeah, we should.
Try not to talk too long.
We need to work on getting some new guests, perhaps.
So,
all right.
Clyde, it's good talking to you.
You bet, Clark. Always a good time.
Thank you, listeners, for listening to this episode of Blocks, Paper, Scissors.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.